Hermann Göring, Adolf Hitler's second in command. Born into a distinguished family, he was charming, flamboyant, and a ruthless manipulator. Göring became addicted to wealth and power and was willing to obtain it by any means necessary.
He is a killer. He is a murderer, and he seems completely fine with that.
Most people from my generation don't understand how over 70 years ago, a small group of Nazis could start a war that killed 60 million people. I want to find out, and to help me, I'm going to use playing cards. Today, they're used by both the military and law enforcement to help identify their targets. But nobody has ever put together a pack of cards for the most notorious group of killers in history. Working with experts, I want to know where each of these Nazis rank in the hierarchy of evil. My name is James Ellis. This is Hitler's Most Wanted. The thing that sets Göring apart from the other sort of leaders of the Nazi regime was the fact that he was a legitimate First World War fighter ace. He hadn't just served in the front lines, but he'd actually been extremely good at what he did.
There's no doubt if the Third Reich had never happened, Göring would now be remembered as a bona fide German hero, and we wouldn't be talking about him in terms of evil.
He was a decorated, dashing man of action, and that explains his success in World War I, his adulation, and it also explains his attraction to Nazism.
I think there's sometimes a danger with Göring that we focus on this sort of larger-than-life character, but behind that lies this really nasty individual.
But he's got grandiosity combined with a glib superficial charm, conning, manipulative nature, a certain level of cruelty underlying everything. Once you put all these characteristics together, that is getting much closer to what we would consider to be a definition of psychopathy, of the psychopath.
So how did a revered fighter pilot of the First World War become a psychopathic war criminal in the Second? I've come to Germany to find out.
So what is this aircraft?
This is an Otto biplane.
I'm meeting with Joshua Fink, a curator at the Flugwerft Schleißheim Air Museum just outside Munich. I want to find out more about Göring's life as a pilot. Göring started his Air Corps flying career in a reconnaissance plane, just like this one.
How dangerous would it have been to fly one of these things then?
Well, first of all, quite dangerous because the covering is only cloth, a special cloth made and painted with a special glue. The problem is that this glue is not very long water resistant.
Okay, so it could fall apart, you mean, if it rained?
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine how brave you'd have to be to actually fly one of these things. I mean, I feel I could almost put my hand through it if I pressed on this hard enough.
Göring had first enlisted in the infantry. He soon realized there was little glory in trench warfare and managed to transfer himself to the Air Corps.
You've got to remember quite how scary it was being a pilot in the First World War. You know, it was an incredibly primitive form of warfare, incredibly risky. The death rate was appallingly high on both sides.
The planes were so hard to fly that more pilots died during training than in combat. But combat itself was extremely dangerous. In essence, this was the dawn of the dogfight.
If this was in a combat situation, you'd have people shooting at you, and I could see how easily that would be for this thing to come crashing to the ground if it was hit by anything.
It has been their duty to fly and to go into combat. And on the other hand, I think that they have been brave and a little bit crazy. You know?
Yeah, I definitely could not have done that. No.
Flying reconnaissance was very high risk, but it didn't provide the honor and adoration Göring craved.
He wanted to be seen as heroic, and distinguishing himself militarily would be, he thought, a way to garner that honor and that level of distinction.
The way to gain distinction was by killing the enemy. So Göring transferred to a fighter squadron. Even a severe hip wound didn't keep him out of action for long.
War suits some people, and Göring is one of those people who feels very at home on the battlefield or, on the battlefield in the sky. He loves showing off, he loves being brave. I think he really enjoys war. That's just part of his personality type.
What I'm looking for is an aircraft that Göring flew at the end of the war, and I understand you have one here.
It's just around here at the corner. It's a Fokker D7.
Ah, this guy.
Yep.
Near the end of World War I, aviation technology had advanced by leaps and bounds.
So this is Top Gun 1918.
Yeah, something like this.
Wow. Wow, how technology's changed.
The Fokker D7 was the most advanced plane of its day, far superior to what the Allies had. But pilots still had to be superb multitaskers.
You was moving, and you had to shoot at a moving target in the air, doing a lot of other stuff.
Yeah.
Because you're not only shooting in the air, you also have to handle your gas, your flaps, your wings, everything.
You're being shot at by other people, and then you've got to get within meters of a target with this aircraft to then have a chance of shooting someone down.
Yeah, that's it. And this is crazy enough for everyone.
It's crazy, but it's incredibly impressive.
First World War pilots were known as Knights of the Sky, and for good reason. They were incredibly brave, and they also had this chivalric code that respected each other. But also, they valorized and glamorized themselves.
The fact that Göring managed to shoot down 22 enemy aircraft with this type of aircraft and earlier technology, that really tells me that he must have been a legitimate war hero.
If you want to call him hero or whatever, he has been an absolutely skilled pilot.
Göring's skill and daring was officially recognized. He became one of Germany's most decorated military men. But the medal he's proudest of and always wears around his neck is pour le mérite, for merit.
It's the highest German honor you could be awarded. And anybody who's got that medal is kind of like a celebrity, a rock star, film star of their day. It shows utmost bravery.
I want to find out how Göring came to be such a heroic figure. Where did his bravado come from? I'm in Bavaria in southern Germany, on my way to his childhood home. Göring was born in 1893, and his upbringing was anything but ordinary.
I think this is it. Oh, check this place out.
This is Castle Veldenstein, believed to be almost 1,000 years old, where his family lived until 1913.
It's like a proper medieval castle. I feel like I've been transported back in time to the Middle Ages. Oh, it's just magnificent. I half expect to see an archer leering at me through one of the arrow slits, or even man-at-arms in full armor up on the battlements. Wow.
I'm meeting with historian Robert Giersch, who can tell me about Göring's time here.
What would it have been like for Hermann Göring to grow up here?
Ich denke, dass die Burg, dass die Wirkung der Burg als mittelalterliches Machtsymbol, dass ihn das fasziniert hat. Diese kühne Lage der Burg auf dem Felsen über dem Tal, das hat ihm sicher gut entsprochen.
Here, Göring played at being a soldier in battle. His family didn't actually own the castle, but from an early age he believed he was someone special.
Göring, unlike many other senior Nazis, actually came from a distinguished background. But it was a family with a distinguished background that was maybe temporarily embarrassed. And so they often lived on the largesse of Göring's godfather, Hermann Eppenstein. Eppenstein also carried on an affair with Göring's mother.
It's likely his mother's infidelity and his father's acceptance of it influenced the rest of Göring's life.
We use our parents as models, and so that unusual familial situation could have struck him in an exceptional way. Göring had a tendency not to follow the rules very much.
What was it about this castle that Göring liked so much?
Gelände als, vielleicht hat sich als kleiner Burgherr gefühlt, war dann auch etwas Besonderes unter seinen Schulkollegen, mit seinen Mitschülern, die da unten im Tal wohnen. Das hat ihm wahrscheinlich auch einen besonderen Status verliehen.
Göring's time at Castle Veldenstein shaped his idea of what a suitable style of living was or should be for a man of his station.
I think it's absolutely fascinating that one of the most powerful Nazis grew up in a beautiful medieval castle. I mean, this thing is stunning, it's grand, it's situated in some of the most beautiful Bavarian countryside. I think being here and just seeing this thing, really, to me, it speaks volumes about Göring the man. As a boy, Göring dreamed of military glory, and he made that dream come true, becoming one of Germany's top fighter aces. But his glorious war came to a crashing halt when Germany suddenly surrendered.
Göring takes the end of the war really badly. Not only, is his favorite pastime, battle, now over, but also he, like so many other German men of his generation, regards Germany as having been stabbed in the back. He regards, the defeat as utterly unnecessary, and in fact, it's people on the home front that are responsible for the defeat and not the Allies.
Göring deeply resented the terms the victorious Allies imposed on Germany. He was looking for radical solutions, and he soon found them. I'm off to the heart of Munich. It's where Göring met Hitler and began his meteoric rise to the top of the Nazi regime. The relationship between these two supremely powerful men was one of the most destructive the world has ever known.
People were dying, and fascists as well as communists were marching with guns.
Hermann Göring was a war hero and a war criminal. I'm on a mission to find out where Göring ranks in the Nazi hierarchy of evil. I've come to Munich, where his relationship with Adolf Hitler began.
Wow, it really is beautiful.
Like the space it offers in the middle of the city.
I'm here to meet Michael Trammer, a photojournalist who can tell me about Göring's connection to Munich's dark past. He's brought me to Königsplatz, the scene of fascist protests in the 1920s.
Why were far-right groups protesting here specifically?
This place was used for far-right rallies due to its size. They understood themselves as fighting force against leftists.
After World War I, Germany was economically devastated. Extremists on both the left and right were seeking radical solutions.
In Munich, you have an attempt to set up a communist state on the Soviet model. And of course, that provokes an amazing backlash from people who are opposed to that form of government and society.
It's another level of violence. You actually have guns being fired, people being killed for their political beliefs.
For sure, I mean, those were armed fights. People were dying, and fascists as well as communists were marching with guns.
It's here that Göring saw Hitler speak.
It must have just been this incredibly powerful moment for someone like Göring that was interested in that type of politics.
As far as we know, he just encountered Hitler in the crowd, and it must have been a stunning moment for him.
So this is where it all began for Göring and Hitler.
This place was the scene of a turning point in history. Göring later said of Hitler, God gave the savior to the German people.
Göring finds Hitler attractive because he is a brilliant orator, he clearly, is a man with zeal on a mission, and he seems to have the answers to all of Germany's problems, all encapsulated in this one very dynamic, charismatic personality. Göring, despite being a big personality himself, is completely sucked in and seduced by it.
Like many war veterans, Göring was radicalized.
We have much to learn about the individual characteristics that lead to radicalization. There is some evidence to suggest that low empathy, high impulsivity, low intellectual resources may contribute to some extent. The individual often has trouble fitting in, is trying to find their own identity.
Today, radicalism is on the march again in Germany.
So I know you're a photojournalist and you cover the far right. Do members of the far right today or neo-Nazis congregate here still?
Yes, this is still a place of gathering because of the historical link. I can actually show you a photo from a rally in 2015. You have the group marching in the middle with their Pegida against the Islamization of the Western world banner.
Oh my goodness.
Pegida mobilizes through social media. It's drawn crowds of 25,000. One of its leaders once affected a Hitler mustache and haircut.
They understand the history. They understand the significance of this place to the Nazis. So there's that connection between then and now, that they do the same sorts of things.
It should be in people's mind when they see a picture of Pegida marching down this road, that this is the exact spot where fascists gathered before they took their power.
Covering the demonstrations of the extreme right can be a dangerous business.
I have been attacked just down the road at Karolinenplatz, for example. I was kicked once.
So it sounds like intimidation is a major tactic they use.
Well, yeah, it is intimidation. I mean, one of their chants is Lügenpresse, which means lying press, accusing the press of spreading fake news about fascist movements. And it is intimidating if you have hundreds or thousands of people targeting you directly as a journalist.
That must be really scary.
Being aware that it can be dangerous and that you are seen as one of their enemies is important, but I'm not scared doing my job. I think it would be the wrong thing to be scared. That would be giving in for them.
Pegida is a far-right group determined to claim Germany for Germans only, not unlike Hitler's followers before them. Back in the 1920s, those followers, like Göring, would seek out Hitler at one of his favorite haunts.
And here we have the Haus Neumeier.
Ah, so this is the place?
Yeah.
Dankeschön.
Danke.
That's good. Buon appetito.
Guten Appetit. We're eating pizza and sitting here talking just a few meters away from the place where Hitler and Göring met for the first time.
It's really surreal for me to be at the place where quite possibly one of the most destructive partnerships in history started, and now it's this modest pizzeria.
After getting to know Hitler, Göring committed himself to the Nazi cause, and Hitler immediately took him in to his inner circle.
Göring was important to Hitler in the early days of the Nazi movement because there were certain members of the aristocratic and conservative establishment in Germany who had a lot of disdain for Nazism, but they saw Göring as a Nazi that they could respect and that they could work with.
In the battleground that was Munich in the 1920s, the Nazis relied on an organization called the SA.
The SA was the Sturmabteilung, or the Storm Division, and this was the paramilitary organization of the Nazi Party.
Göring's first assignment from Hitler was to instill military discipline in this gang of thugs. In 1923, he and Hitler, backed by the newly trained SA, tried to take over the Bavarian government in what became known as the Beer Hall Putsch.
It degenerates into a fiasco. There's no real proper command and control. People don't really know who's leading it. And it's Göring who really, tries to rouse these people to keep going forward. He is a real leader of men at this stage, and he's proving himself to be very good at it.
I've come to the place where Hitler and Göring's attempted coup met its violent end.
So this is the Veldenhalle.
Yeah, this is the Feldherrnhalle, Field Marshal's Hall at Munich Odeonsplatz.
So what happened here then?
Well, in 1923, Hitler and 2,000 men marched towards the War Ministry that is down the road.
Right.
And they were crushed and stopped by Munich police. There was a shootout. 15 of the Nazis were killed. Göring was wounded here with a shot in the leg, and he was carried away by comrades to get him out of battle. And Hitler, after that, was convicted to jail.
Sustaining an injury for the cause put Göring very high in Hitler's esteem. But after the failure of the coup, Göring fled to Sweden. He'd been given morphine for the pain from his wounds and became addicted.
In addition to his morphine addiction, there are questions about Göring's mental state in those years. He was committed to a Swedish institution, he said, as for treatment for his morphine addiction, but it's possible that he was there for mental health reasons.
Göring was so violent he had to be confined in a straitjacket. But he managed to kick his addiction, temporarily. Hermann Göring was in exile for 4 years. When he finally returned, he inaugurated the Nazi reign of terror. It began in Berlin, and that's where I'm headed.
Here they tortured political opponents. It still causes me shivers.
In the 1930s, Hermann Göring was a rising star in the Nazi Party. I've come to Berlin on my mission to find out where he ranks in their hierarchy of evil.
So where are you taking me?
So James, we are now looking at the foundation of the headquarters of the Gestapo.
I'm meeting with historian Stephanie Fischer to find out how Göring used the feared secret police, the Gestapo, to climb to the peak of power.
Well, this part of the building was used as a prison for the Gestapo during the Nazi years.
I know that Göring established the Gestapo in 1933. What exactly was it, and why did he create it?
Well, the Gestapo became an important tool for the Nazis to destroy its political opponents. They used violence against anybody they felt were their enemies. And the people who were in this prison, they experienced tremendous violence.
Yeah.
The seeds of the Gestapo were sown in 1933, when Germany's parliament, or Reichstag, was set on fire.
Göring was absolutely thrilled the night the Reichstag burned down. Even when it was happening, he turned up, watched the flames, and he knew that this was representing a massive open door for Hitler to, walk through and to take fundamental, total power. He loved it.
Just 2 months after the Reichstag fire, Göring created the Gestapo.
The Gestapo was trying to rout out anybody who was perceived to be an enemy of Nazism, who represented a threat to the Third Reich. It was a police force that was there to make sure that people, behaved as the Nazis wanted them to behave.
It's terrifying to be standing in this space and knowing that there were maybe thousands of people who were detained here, and they would have been brutally interrogated. I understand that people would have been tortured in this building when it existed.
It still causes me shivers today to be in a site of Nazi terror, right? And it just makes me aware of the fact that we should not take democracy for granted. Part of why the Gestapo was established, it was one of the important tools for the Nazis to destroy its own democracy.
Göring was said to have told his Gestapo, "Shoot first and inquire afterwards. And if you make mistakes, I will protect you." The rules of civilized behavior meant nothing to him. It's a 6-hour drive south from Berlin to the resort town of Bad Wiessee. I'm headed to an old hotel that was ground zero for an infamous killing spree. It turns out that among the first victims of the Nazi reign of terror were other Nazis, the SA, or stormtroopers.
It's quite eerie being outside this abandoned hotel. It has such a dark history, but it's located in such a beautiful area.
Tourists are drawn here by its famous spa, the beautiful lake nestled into the Alps, and its peaceful atmosphere. But on a June night in 1934, this place was anything but peaceful. It came to be known as the Night of the Long Knives. It was set in motion by Hitler himself, with Göring's enthusiastic help.
The Night of the Long Knives was a way to purge their rivals within the party and the movement. They thought that the SA had gotten too independent, too big for its britches, and could actually be a rival power base within the Nazi state and a rival power base to Hitler himself.
The SA was led by Ernst Röhm, one of Göring's early mentors in the Nazi Party.
Göring fundamentally betrays Ernst Röhm. He's enough of a pragmatist to know, if he's not going to be liked by Hitler, I'm going to help Hitler get rid of him. It's the ultimate betrayal.
So it really pointed to his ruthlessness and his willingness to do anything to consolidate his power.
The Night of the Long Knives was a murder plot. be in no doubt about that. You know, this is a plot that sees Hitler drive through the night to a spa town where various members of the SA are staying. You know, he enters into the hotel. It's, you know, they're brandishing weapons, they're brandishing guns.
Röhm and other senior officers were taken away to prison and shot. Today, the Hotel Lederer is slated for demolition. Destroying it would obliterate its terrible history. But how do the people who visit here feel about it?
What do you know about this place?
Ein bisschen. Ja, ich weiß, dass hier diese SA-Leute erschossen worden sind, damals von der SS. Ja, da gab es Streit um die Führung und die Richtung und Hitler wollte dadurch durch dieses Killing hier die Führungseliten der SA auslöschen.
This place is cited to be demolished. Based on what happened here, do you think it should be preserved?
Aber wer will hier wohnen? Hier will ja kein Mensch wohnen, ne? In so einem Haus mit so einer Vergangenheit.
After the Night of the Long Knives, Hitler moved more firmly toward his ultimate goals: the annihilation of Jews and the Germanization of Europe. I'm headed back to Berlin. I want to find out how Göring helped Hitler achieve his terrible aims.
He is a killer. He is a murderer. And he seems completely fine with that.
I'm in Berlin on my mission to find out where Hermann Göring stands in the Nazi hierarchy of evil. One of the most imposing buildings in Germany, the former headquarters of the Luftwaffe, is a monument of sorts to Göring. To find out more about it, I'm meeting with historian Nick Jackson.
This is the Air Transport Ministry. So if there was a seat of Göring's power,
This would have been it.
this would have been it. In 1936, Göring had the whole block demolished and built what was Europe's largest office. There are 2,300 offices in here. The head of the Luftwaffe, that would have been something that he would have been hugely proud of, very involved in. You know, he rebuilds the Luftwaffe from scratch to this fighting force ready to go in 1939.
By the time war broke out, Göring had created the best air force in the world. The Luftwaffe planes could fly faster, climb faster, and accelerate faster than most of the aircraft they were up against. Many Allied pilots never saw their attacker coming.
It was essentially Göring's big dream. You know, he was a pilot, he loved planes, so the idea he now had his own pet air force, well, that's the best toy a man like Göring could possibly have.
He's a busy man. You think of all the titles that he had, but he certainly would have spent time in this building. In fact, that would have been the main office.
Oh, that right there, those windows?
With the large windows.
All those windows are one room, and that was his office.
That's the main office of the for the building.
He definitely had an office to match his ego.
Other than Hitler, he's the most powerful man in the country.
Throughout the 1930s, as Göring's power increased, so did his taste for the good life. He was developing a hearty appetite for all of life's pleasures.
This looks like a good place.
Yeah, let's go here.
Nick is taking me for a Göring-style meal, where I hope to find out more about Göring's character and how he helped Hitler achieve the Germanization of Europe.
It's funny, when I think of Göring, I think of this fat buffoon dressed in an absolutely ridiculous uniform and indulging in excessive opulence. He was clearly a man of many appetites.
Definitely. I mean, you can see by the size of the man that he was a keen eater. I think that would have been something that was very important in Göring's life.
If Göring was sitting here with us now, what would that be like?
I think he'd be doing most of the talking, and he would have eaten all the food. He's a very dominating character. I mean, it's all about Hermann. He wanted the attention.
Yeah.
You know, sort of standing on top of the mountain, higher than everybody else, and everyone would look and think, that is a great man.
He takes vanity to a whole new level.
Definitely, definitely. I think it's probably fair to say that in every aspect of his life, he was extravagant and boastful and completely over the top. But also perhaps the most likable of the Nazis. But always in the background, you've got that cold murderer, a man who is deeply involved with horrendous Nazi crimes.
The crimes against Jews are the most well-known Nazi atrocities. They began in the 1930s when persecution of the Jews was official Nazi policy. Before the Holocaust, there was Kristallnacht.
Kristallnacht, Night of Broken Glass, was a night of coordinated violence against Jewish property and Jewish people throughout Germany and Austria. Synagogues set on fire, stores looted, and people rounded up and sent to concentration camps.
Göring, with his boundless greed, did not actually approve of the destruction of property.
In fact, with Kristallnacht, he would have preferred killing more Jews, but preserving some of the valuable items and objects and buildings.
He actually told the Jews that they should pay for the damage themselves. I mean, that shows you quite how revolting a specimen he was.
Kristallnacht was only the beginning. Göring was responsible for the order to organize the practical details of the Holocaust.
In 1941, Göring signed a memo authorizing the coordination of the so-called final solution to the Jewish question, the systematic extermination of Jews. Göring's memo authorizing the coordination of mass extermination is a huge step of the development of Nazi policy from persecution to genocide.
The Holocaust has many fathers, but Göring is one of the most significant of all these figures. What's so sort of especially hateful about Göring is that he's not a kind of virulent anti-Semite at heart. He's carrying out anti-Semitic policies in order to advance his own political career.
The fact that he would be willing to be a part of these atrocities simply for personal gain is truly terrifying.
I feel you could be almost disarmed by Göring's eccentricity, that he's this larger-than-life character, he's involved in all these ridiculous excesses, but he was an evil man.
He is a killer. He is a murderer, and he seems completely fine with that.
Göring's willingness to do anything for Hitler made him indispensable. But in 1939, Hitler revealed that he planned to invade Poland, and Göring tried to talk him out of it.
Why was he so against Germany starting the Second World War?
If Germany loses, he loses all of the power, the houses, the uniforms, the glory, the medals, the position that he'd worked so hard and so ruthlessly to achieve. The most important thing for Hermann Göring was Hermann Göring.
Hitler ignored Göring's views and declared war, but named Göring as his eventual successor and Marshal of the Empire. It was the latest in a long list of titles Göring accumulated. He collected them like others might collect autographs. The more, the better. Göring was at the height of his powers, but could he keep his lofty position? That's what I want to find out next. I'm 70 kilometers north of Berlin, inside one of Europe's largest nature reserves. It used to be the site of Hall, Hermann Göring's vast country estate.
What's this? This here?
What's a stone? You found a lot of this.
So this is an original piece of the building?
It's original.
So what is this? Do you know? Like from the
wall.
house? It's part of the wall?
It's a wall, yeah.
Wow.
I'm meeting with Volker Knopf, historian and an authority on Hall. He can tell me how important this place was to Göring during World War II.
That was Hall here.
Uh-huh.
Around here was a guardhouse, and the same on this side. And here where the trees are, if you look on the trees, then you see the walls of the house.
So the main building was right here?
Ja, soweit das Auge reicht.
So it's been completely engulfed
Sehr groß.
by the forest.
Ja, aber damals war hier ein Park, ein großer Park. Keine Bäume oder nur wenige Bäume.
There's little evidence any buildings were ever here. Just a few tunnels remain.
Alle Häuser waren verbunden durch solche Gänge.
So this was a passage between two buildings to move supplies.
Ja, ja. Und in dieses Loch kann ich gefahrlos mit Ihnen runtergehen. Es wird
You can step in that.
Me, I know it. For you.
Oh, wow, look at that. There is no way I'm going in there.
Karen Hall, named after Göring's deceased wife Karen, began as a simple hunting lodge. By 1937, after years of renovations, it was a palatial complex. It had everything Göring could want, including a massive library, ballroom, swimming pool, even a private zoo. Göring wanted the estate to be known as a shrine to Karen. In reality, it was a shrine to himself.
This is a playground fit for what he regards himself almost like now a prince. So this is his own sort of palace, and it fits his ego.
Komm, ja, mein Cäsar. Kommst du mich besuchen?
Karen Hall recreated the conditions of the good life and of the style of living befitting a man of his station that he'd learned at Castle Veldenstein in his youth. He held parties there, he entertained foreign dignitaries there. It was really where he lived an extravagant, opulent life.
Karen Hall was crammed with art masterpieces, looted from occupied Europe, one of the grandest private collections in the world. It was also his unofficial office, where his staff would come from Berlin to get their orders.
What do you think about Göring?
War das joviale Gesicht des Nationalsozialismus. Aber konnte heute oder in dieser Minute die Wange seines Kindes und eine halbe Stunde später konnte ein Todesurteil unterzeichnen. Das war Göring. Hatte viele Gesichter.
The beginning of World War II was good for Göring. The Nazis scored victory after victory with his Luftwaffe leading the charge. Then came setbacks.
It was Göring's job to destroy the British Air Force, the Royal Air Force, in order to make way for the German invasion barges and then the overall invasion of the British Isles. Now, this never happened because the Luftwaffe failed at their job and the RAF managed to outwit Göring. It was a terrible failure for him.
Göring had solemnly promised Hitler no bombs would ever fall on Germany.
The other big failure of Göring and his Luftwaffe is the fact that the RAF managed to bomb the Ruhr, Germany's industrial heartland. Göring, one of his old fighters, has now failed him twice. This actually is the beginning of Göring's slide into, nothingness in the Nazi regime.
Göring was increasingly isolated from the inner circle and increasingly retreated to Karen Hall and to his life of pleasure and opulence.
Hat in seinen Memoiren geschrieben, wenn man Karen Hall betrat, hatte man das Gefühl, als herrsche tiefster Frieden. Hat hier gelebt, als wäre ihn herum kein Krieg.
Göring was still trotted out on ceremonial occasions, but even that rankled his Nazi colleagues. Joseph Goebbels wrote, "Bemedaled fools and vain perfumed fops have no place in our war leadership. It's effeminate behavior given the current situation."
Towards the end of the war, as the Reich starts falling apart, well, so does Göring. And he retreats into his own sort of kind of make-believe world, stuffed with looted and plundered art, complete with all sorts of baubles, a chest full of medals. I mean, he cuts an absurd figure. And also, he's hopelessly addicted to drugs. Essentially, what you've got is a fat, drug-addled, dipsomaniac, who has lost any respect.
But Göring still harbored delusions of grandeur.
Towards the end of the war, Göring sent a message to Hitler where he essentially said, if I don't hear from you by a certain time, I'll assume you're unable to fulfill the duties of Führer, and I'll take over control and command of the Reich. Hitler regarded this as an extreme act of betrayal, and it was really the final nail in the coffin in terms of Hitler's relationship with Göring.
As the Russian army approached, Göring moved his plundered possessions to safety and fled, ordering Karen Hall to be destroyed.
Göring resigned to the Americans and expected to be treated as the representative of a defeated power. Instead, he was arrested for war crimes.
One of the things I find most interesting about Göring is when he was finally captured, he supposedly believed that he deserved a parade rather than to be convicted. One possibility is that his increased drug use had led to just increasingly delusional thought processes.
Göring is sentenced to death, and he knows he's going to be hanged. But actually, he's still got one more card up his sleeve, and he plays it actually very well. He's got a suicide pill. His body is discovered when a guard looks through the hatch in his cell, and there is Göring's dead form. His face is set in a kind of horrible rictus grin, as if he's having the last laugh.
My trip to Karenhall has given me the last piece of the puzzle that is Hermann Göring. Now it's time for me to finally determine where this complicated character fits into Hitler's hierarchy of evil.
He murdered and plundered his way across Europe, and he murdered and plundered his own people.
My visit to Germany has helped inform my understanding of Hermann Göring's position in the Nazi hierarchy of evil. Now it's time for us to decide where he should be placed in our unique pack of cards. The same kind of pack that law enforcers use today to identify their most dangerous killers. This is Hitler's Most Wanted. Guy, what's your impression of Göring as a person?
Frankly, I find it a little hard not to be seduced by him. I think he has an enormous amount of charm.
And that's what makes that personality so dangerous, is the fact that he can charm you, he can trick you, he can pull one over on you, and he can send you to a concentration camp.
Göring used charm to mask his brutality. He saw himself as a dashing man of action and a subtle diplomat who could turn every situation to his advantage. One location to me that really exemplified his personality was Karenhall, which at the time was this incredibly opulent pleasure palace. Anthony, why was Göring so obsessed with opulence?
Göring had a very particular idea of appropriate living for a man of his station. The idea was formed in his youth, living at Castle Veldenstein, and he tried to realize it in Karenhall.
I think that's absolutely right. He was a big personality, and he had very, very greedy tastes. You know, he liked his food, he liked his drink, he liked his morphine, and he liked his works of art. In many ways, he was like this big monster that just needed to suck in as much stuff as he could, and it never ended.
What was his motivation?
I think, in absolutely succinct terms, he was a thief. When he got a chance to aggrandize himself and enrich himself, he took it.
Göring killed innocent people to maintain power and the wealth and luxury that came with it. He was ruthlessly ambitious, undermining rivals on his climb to the top. I think there's sometimes a danger with Göring that we focus on this sort of larger-than-life character, but behind that lies this really nasty individual.
Immediately after Kristallnacht, Göring sets to work coming up with ordinances to dispossess Jews, strip them of money and of assets. So we really see that nasty scheming in the service of Nazi anti-Semitism right in that example.
For Göring, anti-Semitism was a practicality. He wasn't actually, I don't think, a convinced anti-Semite.
To some extent, that makes you wonder, it makes me wonder, why is he doing the things he's doing? He's doing them for personal gain. He really is using the atrocities as a tool. To some extent, that, to me, suggests a greater evil.
So what I'd like to do now is figure out where Göring ranks in the Nazi hierarchy of evil. So Matt, if you want to go first.
Well, I think psychologically he's up there. I give him a 4.
Anthony?
He was central to the early rise of the Nazi Party. He was central to remilitarization. He was central to the early successes in the war. Add to all of that his direct responsibility for the so-called final solution, and we have to rank him at number 4.
Guy?
I'll put him at 4 as well, because he murdered and plundered his way across Europe, and he murdered and plundered his own people.
So you guys have a unanimous consensus, and based on my experience exploring his story in Germany and our discussion here, I'm going to agree. He is number 4. He is the ace of clubs. 4th in the Nazi hierarchy of evil, Hermann Göring had a hand in almost all of that regime's crimes. He bears enormous responsibility for the horrors that befell millions of innocents. Hans Frank, Hitler's conniving personal lawyer.
He saw the law as a means to power.
He twisted the legal system to sanction the Führer's crimes and enslaved a nation.
I despise him.
Under his tyrannical rule, millions of Polish Jews were sent to the gas chamber.
Every Jew was a target for extermination.
What turned a cultured lawyer into the monster known as the Butcher of Poland.
Most people from my generation don't understand how over 70 years ago, a small group of Nazis could start a war that killed 60 million people. I want to find out, and to help me, I'm going to use playing cards. Today, they're used by both the military and law enforcement to help identify their targets. But nobody has ever put together a pack of cards for the most notorious group of killers in history. Working with experts, I want to know where each of these Nazis rank in the hierarchy of evil. My name is James Ellis.
This is Hitler's Most Wanted.
Why is Hitler's lawyer someone we should even care about?
If we were in Poland, Hans Frank would be an obvious choice to talk about. He was responsible for so many atrocities, so much suffering.
What I particularly find fascinating about Frank is that, he is a middle-class professional. He's a lawyer, and this is a classic example of how the trappings of kind of bourgeois respectability can be so easily subverted and used to promote something incredibly vile.
And history is filled with strong, smart, intelligent individuals who have ended up on the wrong side of morality.
Frank is absolutely pivotal. He has this massive role, he exterminates a lot of people, and he is right at the heart of the Third Reich.
Despite all of that, why do the majority of people still not know who he is?
To answer the question, I've come to Germany, to the small town of Ecklach, northwest of Hamburg.
So Nicholas, tell me, what do we have here?
Some pictures. This first one is Hitler before he took over power in Germany. My father was his personal liar between, I would say, 28 and 33 of the last century.
Author and journalist Nicholas Frank is the youngest of Hans Frank's 5 children. He's the only one among them to have denounced their father.
And here you can see little Nicholas.
And this kid is you?
Yeah, that kid is me.
How old are you here?
2 years.
2 years old.
Yes. I hated this close.
Hans Frank was appointed Governor General of Poland when the country fell to the Germans in 1939. Nicholas spent his first years as a witness to his father's rule over the occupied territory.
And here's the King of Poland, my father, on the tower of the Warsaw Castle. And this I hate especially, this picture.
Why?
Yes, because at this direction was the ghetto, at this direction was concentration camp, down in the streets, everywhere, the SS guards, and he was pretending here to be a peaceful, far-looking statesman. He knew exactly what he really was, the governor on a sea of blood.
Before his death, Hans Frank wrote a note to each of his children inside a small book of prayers.
And here's the inscription. It was written on the 18th of September 1946.
And what does the message roughly say?
In most heartful love, he gives me this small prayer book, and he wishes me a very good life under the merciful guard of God.
And how do you feel when you read it now?
This is all lies. This is all lies. Why didn't he write, my dear beloved Nicky? I was a criminal. I am sure that I will get the death penalty. And it's right. Please have a little bit more civil courage, which I never had. Please lead quite a different life. Yours, Fatih.
So you wish he'd admitted to his crimes and taken responsibility for his actions?
Klar. I despise him.
How did Hans Frank become such a terrifying and hated figure? Not just to his own flesh and blood, but to a whole nation. To find out, I'm in Berlin, the city where Hans Frank first came to Hitler's attention.
You have to be a certain way to get attracted to a movement like the Nazis.
Yes.
What was it about the Nazi Party that attracted Hans Frank?
I mean, I think it's an excellent question in the sense that it's not an obvious home for a lawyer.
No.
The principle of National Socialism is precisely that people are not equal, and that what they say overrides the law.
Yeah.
Dr. Henning Grunwald is an expert on legal history during the Weimar Republic. I want to understand how Hans Frank became a Nazi and rose through party ranks.
So, what was the environment in which he became a lawyer?
Well, it was the Weimar Republic, so a very politically fraught environment. And Frank, from his father, who was a failed lawyer, imbued him with attitudes that we would call quite clearly anti-Semitic.
Hans Frank was born into a professional middle-class family, a very patriotic family. His brother was killed in action in World War I. Hans Frank himself joined the military after high school, but never saw action before the armistice was signed.
At the end of the First World War, you've got young men looking for a purpose. In many ways, they're rootless. They've come back from war, or they've just missed out on the war, but there's no obvious job for them to fall into. And then, of course, you've got the Treaty of Versailles, negotiated by the Allies, very much against Germany, really making Germany pay for that war. And so when you've got a voice like Hitler's saying to the millions of young men like Hans Frank, I'm going to save this, I'm going to sort this out, it's not surprising that men like Frank can fall under his spell.
Hans Frank joined the early Nazi movement in Munich. But it wasn't until he started defending Nazi thugs, known as stormtroopers, that he came to the Führer's attention.
How does he become Hitler's lawyer?
Yeah. So, in 1928, he represented Hitler himself in the so-called Italian gold trials, which turned around allegations in the electoral campaign of 1928 that Hitler essentially was in Mussolini's pocket. Frank pleaded on Hitler's behalf, and then on the back of that, managed to persuade him to become his lawyer, to become the Nazi Party lawyer.
Frank goes on to represent many Nazis in the courts. But his personal mission was to do much more than defend individual clients. He just needed an opportunity.
In late September 1930, Nazi officers are accused in the so-called Ulm-Reichswehr trial. So this is about a group of 3 National Socialist officers who have formed a kind of, if you will, revolutionary cell.
3 junior military officers were charged with spreading Nazi doctrines, and Frank used that trial to dramatically defend them and to defend Nazism more broadly.
But it's Frank's star witness who steals the show.
Frank's real stroke of sort of genius there was to put Hitler out and as a witness under oath.
Hitler knows that he can't just appeal to disaffected youth. No, what he also needs to do is to impress the bourgeoisie. And these are people who take the rule of law very seriously. They know that the rule of law gives stability. And if the Nazi Party can seem part of that stable structure, then it makes it appear far more acceptable, far more legitimate, and therefore far more likely for Hitler to get into power.
Hitler says, I sympathize with these officers in the dock. You know, they have the right ideas, but the wrong means. You know, we will seek power only by legal means.
The trial was a media sensation, and it became Frank's signature case. The accused are found guilty, but given lenient sentences. But for Hans Frank, the verdict was irrelevant.
There's a lot of newspaper coverage, inimical, friendly. It doesn't matter, because in this case, the exposure is everything. The trial really was crucial both for the Nazi Party and for the trajectory of
Frank's career.
Frank's skillful manipulation of the courtroom led to a dramatic turn in both his and the Führer's fortunes. In the 1930 election, the Nazis took 18% of the popular vote and were now the second largest political party in Germany. So Frank really plays a key role in legitimizing the Nazi Party to a large group of German society.
Yes, precisely.
By 1933, Hitler had risen to power in Germany. The Führer rewarded Frank for his loyalty with political appointments. But where he really made his mark is behind the scenes as the party's chief legal policymaker.
Es ist daher Aufgabe des Rechts, diese, das Charakteristische des deutschen Lebens ausmachende und die schöpferische Wurzel aller deutschen Tat gewährleistende Rassensubstanz des deutschen Volkes mit aller Macht aller Welt gegenüber zu schützen.
There are those who follow laws, and there are those who create and shape them. Individuals who follow laws tend to be moral, law-abiding citizens. Individuals that create and shape laws don't necessarily fall into that category. In fact, history is marred with evidence of individuals who have used their own power and their ability to create and shape laws to their own discretion, regardless of morality and ethics.
One of Frank's first acts was to target so-called enemies in his own profession.
It starts with the Jews that were evicted, quite literally, right, from the courthouses. You know, on the morning of 7th of April, the stormtroopers came and basically said, we will, you know, remove all Jewish lawyers.
The names of more than 600 of those professionals are listed here.
These people were driven out of the legal profession and ultimately murdered because they were Jews. Frank was central in driving them out and thereby facilitating their murder.
So this to me really exemplifies the contempt that Hans Frank and the Nazis had for the law.
Basically he saw the law as a means to power.
But for Hans Frank, this was just the beginning.
The Jews in general are an object of Frank's policy who have to be destroyed.
My quest to find out where Hans Frank sits in the hierarchy of evil has brought me to the Polish city of Krakow, where Hitler's personal lawyer spent most of the war. What I've come here to explore is this. What happened to turn a man with an exceptional legal mind into the monster known as the Butcher of Poland? The Germans invaded Poland in September 1939, instigating the bloodiest military conflict in modern history. After the military victory, Hitler appointed Hans Frank Governor General of the occupied territory. In a gesture that would foreshadow his despotic rule, Hans Frank moved into Václav Castle, the former royal residence of Polish kings. It was right here that Hans Frank established himself as a pseudo-monarch, ruling over his Polish realm. Frank's first order of business was to implement Nazi racist doctrine. At its core was the persecution of the Jews. So is this part of the Ghetto Wall?
This is the left part of the Ghetto Wall, yes.
To learn how he accomplished this, I'm turning to historian Dr. Magnus Brachtken. He's brought me to an infamous symbol of Nazi cruelty.
The plaque says, to those who became the victims of Hitler and the occupation.
Well, should we have a look and see what it looks like on the other side, around here?
Okay.
So how personally involved was Hans Frank in the creation and the implementation of the Krakow ghetto?
When the war started and he was established here, Frank wanted to get his area as free of Jews as the rest of the Reich.
Hans Frank immediately began implementing anti-Semitic measures.
He starts very quickly enacting laws against the Jews, stripping them of all their rights and stripping them, frankly, of their dignity.
Across Poland, the Nazis closed synagogues and plundered Jewish homes. They mandated forced labor for any Jew over the age of 12. In 1940, Frank upped the ante, introducing a brutal new measure to segregate the Jewish population.
Ghettos are effectively prisons. There's no other word to describe them. There's a great big wall around it, there's a barbed wire around it, there are troops patrolling it. It's also another way of proving your utter superiority over another people. What do? You fence them in, you wall them in, you block them in.
So these buildings would have been inside the ghetto?
Inside the ghetto, yes.
So people would have been crammed into these?
Yeah, and of course it's concentrated. You have the wall around it and you are not allowed to get out. And the conditions would be very rough because there is little options to have food and all the necessary everyday support in here.
The Nazis built hundreds of ghettos across Poland. The Warsaw Ghetto was the largest. 400,000 people were confined to 3.4 kilometers of space.
You can imagine the overcrowding, the filth, the hunger, the deprivation. Add to that the Nazis were forcing Jews in the ghetto to participate in forced labor. They were farming them out, essentially, to German companies and factories.
Well, it looks like there's another part of the wall here.
Yes, indeed.
What really hits home for me is there would have been children behind these walls.
It's a playground on the other side today, which is very strange contrast to imagine how it would have been there in 1941, 1942, 43.
In 2.5 years of the occupation, 83,000 Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto alone died from disease and starvation.
People tried to survive somehow, to get some food, to get a normal life, if we can call it normal at all. It was all covered by this permanent threat and all covered by the need to get something to eat, which is at the heart of everything. And if you get ill, it's of course more or less a death sentence.
Yeah, it's just horrifying. Every day it was just about trying to survive to the next day.
Exactly.
The tombstone shape of Krakow's ghetto walls was tragically prophetic.
The Nazis decided to build ghettos throughout Poland because they wanted to make it easier to round up the Jews when it came to slaughter them. You know where to get them when you want to deport them to the camps.
Across occupied Europe, Hitler's deputies implemented the final solution: the deliberate and systematic extermination of the Jews. Despite the grossly criminal directive, Hans Frank showed no objection to state-organized mass murder.
People often conflate intelligence and wisdom with morality. We assume that people who are intelligent enough to know better are going to fall on the right side of ethics and morality, but this isn't necessarily the case.
Addressing his senior officials in late 1941, Hans Frank insisted they show no mercy in carrying out the Führer's plan.
And then people were deported to the death camps, extermination camps, and most of them were killed there.
It's just so crazy for me just to think that people could have that thought process, to sit around and say, right, we're going to make this policy of our regime to do that.
The Jews in general are an object of the National Socialist policy, of Frank's policy, who have to be destroyed.
By the end of the war, after 5.5 years of brutal occupation, 3 million Jews, 90% of Poland's Jewish population, were murdered by the Nazis.
Hans Frank was rightly known and is rightly remembered as the Butcher of Poland. He ruled with an iron fist and in an incredibly cruel way. His mission was to exterminate the Jewish population of Poland. Every Jew was a target for extermination.
But Hans Frank doesn't stop with the genocide of Poland's Jews. He is determined to wipe an entire nation off the map.
For them, Polish people only being something like slaves.
I'm in Krakow, the center of Nazi occupation in Poland during the war, to investigate Hans Frank. He ruled the Nazi-held territory
and I'm here to learn about his role in the Führer's chilling plans for a conquered nation.
When was this museum founded?
There's the first exhibition in 1991.
Mateusz Gaulik is a historian at the Home Army Museum. He is an expert on Poland's resistance movement during the Second World War.
We have some letter paper. Hans Frank used it when he wrote, for example, orders to his officers, orders like shoot somebody and so on. And we have an original paper, letter paper. For example, you see Heil Hitler, Hans Frank is his signature.
As Poland's de facto ruler, Hans Frank was tasked with paving the way for the Führer's cold-blooded vision in the occupied territory.
Generalplan Ost, or General Plan East, was a big master plan drawn up by the Nazis and under, obviously, the stewardship of Hitler to basically conquer and subdue everything east of Berlin, all the way through to Moscow. You were going to treat all these lands as a kind of breadbasket for the German people. The existing people there, the Untermenschen, the subhumans, would be driven even further east, and then all that territory was then going to be lived in by Germanic settlers. Generalplan Ost basically called for a liquidation of millions of people, an occupation of millions of square miles of territory. It was absolutely barbaric.
Untermensch is a term in Nazi racial ideology. It essentially means subhuman, and it referred to the groups that the Nazis saw as racially inferior. Of course, the Jews are the most prominent example, but the Nazis also saw Slavs as racially inferior, as a population fit only for servitude and eventual displacement.
To enact the Führer's plan, Frank opened Poland's doors to Nazi death squads in September 1939. They started at the very top of Polish society.
I know that when the Germans occupied Poland, one of the first things they did is try to remove the sort of Polish elites.
Yes, exactly. First prisoners in the concentration camp in Auschwitz were teachers, priests, professors from the University of, for example, here from Krakow.
It seems to me as if the Germans were trying to turn Poland into a slave state.
Yeah, exactly. For them, Polish people only being something like slaves. They working in the concentration camp, in worker camp.
To the Germans, Poland was to become nothing more than a giant labor camp. What Hans Frank hadn't counted on, however, was the indomitable spirit of the Polish people.
This is an amazing collection of firearms.
Yeah, MG42, rifles like Mosin, Mausers, Panzerfaust, MG34, for example, Polish mortars, a lot of guns.
The Home Army Museum features a small arsenal, once used by those who dared to fight the Germans.
The Polish Home Army was essentially a semi-uniformed resistance to Hitler and the occupying Nazi forces. These were incredibly brave men and women, and what they were doing was trying to hamper as much of the German occupation as they could. Frank, of course, absolutely loathed them and wanted to destroy them.
The Home Army was a symbol for not only of our military resistance, but also is a symbol of freedom, that we cannot give up. Even in the 1939, everybody believed that we win this war. Maybe not this year, maybe next year, but we win. And when we resistance to Germans, then we have a hope.
So it was about fighting back and keeping the hope alive that one day Poland will be liberated from the Nazis.
Yes, because you see death in every day.
The Home Army counted nearly 400,000 members by 1944, but they were fighting with scraps.
So obviously the MG42 is a German machine gun.
Yeah, German machine gun which Home Army captured from a train. And you see that nicknames of Polish soldiers. For example, Hardy, tough guy.
So the people who captured these engraved their nicknames on them?
They use it, and is my weapon. I shoot it and is a part of me. And I wrote my nickname.
Amazing.
One thing that stands out about Poland during World War II is that you had an effective and organized armed resistance to the Nazis. It was able to sabotage and slow down and foil some Nazi plans to impose their will on Poland.
The most well-known act of Polish resistance to the Germans is the Warsaw Uprising in the summer of 1944.
As the Allies advance towards Berlin, the Home Army, it feels incredibly empowered by the fact that the Red Army, Stalin's forces, are coming in from the east, and they're going to sweep, hopefully, into Warsaw and liberate it from the Nazis. And so, as Stalin approaches, the Home Army decides to rise up, fight street by street throughout Warsaw. What happens is appalling. Stalin and the Red Army stop, and he lets the rising fail. He wants the Germans to crush the Poles, and then he's then going to crush the Germans.
After 63 days of bitter fighting, the far better armed Wehrmacht defeated the uprising. So how did the Germans respond to attacks by the Polish Home Army?
I give you an example. When Polish resistance Home Army officer killed Polish actor who collaborate with Germans, they killed 150 people in Warsaw.
150 people?
Yes. Because Polish resistance killed one actor.
For one actor?
Yeah.
That's horrifying. The reprisals against those who dared to fight the Nazis were merciless. And even the very act of trying to stay alive could mean death.
Here we have just little piece of pork fat.
Yep.
For that thing, I would go to Treblinka camp.
You go to a death camp
Yes.
for just having
Yes.
pork fat?
It was banned.
On my mission to figure out where Hans Frank sits in Hitler's hierarchy of evil, I've come to the home of author Aleksandra Zubrotko-Janicka. She's written extensively on Polish women and daily life under the German occupation. Right, so I just ladle beans in here?
We have to process them to mousse.
I'm here to learn how Poles resisted Frank's brutal regime on the home front.
But be careful for your fingers.
I will. I'll try not to grind anything off. We're baking a cake with the same limited ingredients Poles had in the war, when food was strictly rationed by the Germans. And so they could grow the beans themselves. It was very efficient to cook with beans.
Gardening was very popular because everyone tried to grow veggies to eat them. Starvation was a huge problem.
The Nazi policy of rationing food during the occupation of Poland was really a policy of starvation. It was a policy of genocide carried out through starvation, and it wasn't carried out equally.
Using a food rationing system, the Nazis set out to starve the Poles. Non-Jews were given just enough food to keep them in chains. The Jews got the very worst of it. Their allotment of food wouldn't keep them alive for long. How many ingredients go into the cake?
Just 3.
Just 3 ingredients?
Yes.
Why so few?
During wartime, there was a real struggle to get some elaborate ingredients.
Life under Hans Frank became one long fight for survival. At harvest time, German troops went to the countryside to steal crops for export to Germany. Peasants were shot for not fulfilling their quota. The Poles turned to the black market to stay alive. They grew vegetables in secret or raised livestock in locations hidden from the Germans.
People have an innate instinct to survive. In life and death situations, people may be willing to do things that they wouldn't normally be comfortable doing, things that may go against their moral code.
So by making a cake like this, it's not only part of surviving, it's also part of resisting.
Exactly. Thanks to Polish women who really smuggling those banned produce, people can eat, people can resist. So we have to mix egg yolks with our sweetener.
Okay.
We have to put our beans into the mix.
So you're using the whole of the egg, you're using both the yolks and the whites.
Nothing could go to waste. Even breadcrumbs were used.
How am I looking?
Better.
Better?
Yeah.
Under Frank's repressive regime, Polish women risked their lives to feed their families.
And what would happen if they were caught with ingredients that were banned?
I show you. Here we have just a little piece of pork fat.
Yep.
For that thing, I would go to Treblinka camp.
You go to a death camp
Yes.
for just having pork fat.
It was banned. Pork fat or having unregistered porks,
Yeah.
that was a capital offense.
So it was a death sentence to be found with something like this in your possession.
Yes, there are many examples of people that were taken out of a train and killed next to train, just on the side.
Wow.
It was awful, it was scary, but Poles always find a way.
The only way that Poles could survive the harsh rationing imposed by Hans Frank was to rely on very creative strategies, usually devised by Polish women, to subvert and undercut the rationing system. This involved the black market, this involved smuggling. This was the only way for anyone to survive the forced starvation.
That looks great. Look at that.
It looks almost like sponge cake.
It does. I'd say I've never had white bean cake before. This is like... That's really good. I can't believe this is just 3 major ingredients.
Polish wartime cookery books are full of recipes like that.
Yet despite the efforts to subvert Nazi-engineered famine, hundreds of thousands of Jews and non-Jewish Poles died from starvation and disease during the war, and Hans Frank was the man who orchestrated it all. The Butcher of Poland's reign eventually came to an end. I want to find out how, from someone who witnessed Frank's demise firsthand.
What is left in my memory is cowardice.
To complete my investigation into Hans Frank's story, I've returned to Germany to speak with his son once again.
Nicholas?
Hi, James.
Thank you so much for agreeing to speak with me again.
Nicholas has a unique perspective on the rise and fall of Hans Frank's tyranny.
So he loved very much his office on the Wawel, the castle of Krakow, where all the former Polish kings were residing. And he was happy about his 111 uniforms.
111.
And especially happy he was about his Mercedes, because his Mercedes has the same yellow light like Hitler's Mercedes had.
The post of Governor General over occupied Poland conferred more than just power. It gave Hans Frank status and wealth. Despite his legal training, during his 5 years ruling over the Polish people, Frank flouted his ability to break the law, thinking nothing of stealing precious works of art and giving jewels robbed from Jews to his wife and mistress.
Frank was spending an enormous sum of money to bring in fineries, riches. His wife was particularly drawn to furs. So they were buying luxuries, they were plundering wealth, to the point that Hans Frank's wife would even go shopping in the Krakow ghetto and try to get what she referred to as bargains from the very desperate population there.
He became the king of Poland. And he was so happy. And he never cared about all the victims in his country.
And when did you become aware of your father's crimes?
It started when they arrested my father at our village in Upper Bavaria on the 4th of May, 1945.
Yeah.
If you want a measure of what kind of man Hans Frank was, you only have to see what he does when the Soviets reach the gates of Krakow, you know, his kind of medieval castle. He flees.
As the Red Army closed in from the east, Hans Frank gathered his family, truckloads of stolen art, and hightailed it back to Germany. He hid out in the Bavarian Alps until he was arrested by the Americans and taken to Nuremberg to stand trial for war crimes. In the dock, he downplayed his knowledge of and role in the Holocaust.
Frank spun fables at his trial in an attempt to keep himself alive. It's laughable that Frank didn't have personal, direct knowledge of exactly what was happening, not only in the ghettos that he created and oversaw, but in the death camps, 4 of which were in the territory of occupied Poland, of which he was the governor general.
Instead of owning up to his heinous crimes, Hans Frank tried to pass off his behavior as the work of an evil alter ego.
He told the psychiatrist in Nuremberg in his cell that he is sure that he himself is 2 persons. The one is a lawyer, the well-educated piano player, and the other is this ugly guy.
And what do you think?
He was just one person, one character, one mass murderer.
So as far as you're concerned, there's absolutely no way that your father could not have known about all the atrocities that were being committed by the Nazis in Poland?
Right. He knew everything. Also, my mother knew everything. They knew exactly what was going on every day, what was going on in the ghetto, in the concentration camp.
What's the hardest part about being the son of Hans Frank?
The hardest thing to think every day of him, to know nearly everything about his involvement in all those horrible crimes.
Hans Frank was found guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity. He was hanged in October 1946. So what's this here?
This is my biggest joy every day. This is the coat of my father. I can see it from our living room, sitting there and saying every day to my father, that's the only thing you have deserved, being a scapegoat at our little lake. And since then, he is standing here, and I'm very happy.
Why does it make you happy?
It shows for me that what is left of him in my memory, his crimes, and even more, his cowardice. And when I look at him, I always accuse him, why have you done all of this? So what is really left from him is this coat, which he loved very much, and in which he also distributed so much fear to all the others who saw it. And now he's standing here and only the birds have to be afraid of him.
Now that I know Hans Frank's central role in the brutal and lengthy occupation of Poland, it's time to figure out where he stacks up in Hitler's hierarchy.
You can slaughter them, lock them up, kill them, eradicate them, it doesn't matter. They're not human beings.
My visits to Poland and Germany have helped me understand Hans Frank's role in the Third Reich. Now it's time for us to decide where this Nazi lands in the hierarchy of evil. Using our unique system of playing cards, I want to determine where Hans Frank ranks in Hitler's Most Wanted.
The experience which had the biggest impact on me was meeting Hans Frank's son, Nicholas. I was amazed by Nicholas' bravery because I could not imagine publicly eviscerating my own father. But in his case, he feels people need to understand his father's crime.
In a very public, unvarnished, and raw way, Nicholas Frank is modeling what he thinks German society should do in general to grapple with the familial and the national legacy of the Nazi era. He has a message for subsequent generations and particularly for contemporary Germans. And that message isn't one of guilt or shame, it's responsibility.
For Nicholas, disseminating his father's story is vital to confronting Germany's past and preventing the reoccurrence of the heinous crimes committed across Poland during the Second World War.
Why was the Nazi occupation of Poland so brutal?
The Nazis regarded Poland as their own backyard. It was their territory to do with exactly how they liked, and the people they lived there, they didn't really regard as people. They regarded them as being subhuman. Now, if you start, regarding another human being as being no better than a sheep or a pig or a cattle, then it's much easier to do with them exactly what you like. So you can slaughter them, lock them up, kill them, eradicate them. It doesn't matter. They're not human beings.
I agree. Hans Frank's goals in Poland were to exterminate the Jews as quickly as possible and to enslave and deplace the ethnic Polish population.
If you see these individuals as subhuman, then to some extent you don't even interpret the behaviors that you're committing against them as immoral. It's a way to get around your own morality.
A key player in the Führer's master plan for the East, Hans Frank warped the law to encourage persecution, enslavement, starvation, and genocide.
You are all united in the fact that he was a central figure in the Nazi regime. But why do the majority of people know nothing about him?
I think part of the problem is that very few people in Western Europe and in North America actually study and look at the experience of Eastern Europe and Poland in particular. I think that's a great shame, and I think that Frank is someone who we need to know a lot more about.
The creation of the ghettos, the systematic starvation of the Polish people, and the state-sanctioned mass murder of the Jews were all overseen in the territory Hans Frank ruled. These atrocities place him well inside Hitler's circle of evil.
What I'd like to do now is to come to some sort of conclusion as to where you think Hans Frank should rank in the Nazi hierarchy of evil. Anthony, you go first.
Hans Frank, as a lawyer, played a large role in popularizing the Nazi Party, but he wasn't the only lawyer involved with doing that. As Governor General of occupied Poland, he was certainly central to the atrocities committed there, but he wasn't central to the leadership of the Reich. At the same time, we have to take into account the sheer brutality, the sheer suffering of his reign. I say he's number 20.
Matt?
On the one hand, I agree, he's just a lawyer. On the other hand, 3 million Jews and countless Poles died in Poland under his reign. I think he's more significant.
I'm going to put him around 12.
He destroyed millions of people. He ruled over a vast segment of the Third Reich with the utmost barbarity. For me, he's got to be in the top 10. I'm going to give him an 8.
So the three of you have different views there and where you think he should rank. For me, it's quite simple. His fingerprints are on some of the worst Nazi atrocities. He has the blood of millions on his hands. I therefore rank him at number 10. He is the Queen of Hearts.
Though he was well trained to know right from wrong, Hans Frank was nothing more than a vicious thug and a remorseless thief. For the genocide of Poland's Jews and the untold suffering of millions of non-Jewish Poles, Hans Frank makes it into the top 10 of Hitler's Most Wanted.